Hi guys, Katie here for Module 5 discussion. For Chapter 7, I chose the second question, considering your career track and professional history. What are the most important leadership and followership approaches you should use? So I think the most important leadership approach is to use the situational approach. So every organization has different values, goals, objectives. So does every employee, every situation. Page 197 says, I think it's Fiedler, believed that leadership was a reflection of both the leader's personality and behavior, which were constant. He believed that leaders do not change their leadership styles. Rather, when situations change, leaders must adapt their leadership strategies. I think this quote really kind of embodies the experiences I've had as a manager in the past and as a leader. There's always just so many variables with every situation that you kind of have to approach each situation as its own, because what worked for the first situation might not work for the next. So you need to be able to adapt, is I guess what I'm looking for there. For followership, I liked the 4D followership by Roger Adair, that model, because it was really easy to understand and distinguish where someone would fall on that model on page 212. I think as a manager, this could kind of help you determine where your employees might fall on that model and what you might need to do to improve their satisfaction with their job or negativity or even avoid resignation. For the next question for Chapter 7, I picked the importance of mentorship and coaching question. I think both mentorship and coaching are important in any management career, any career really. I haven't been an official mentor for someone, but I've done a lot of coaching in previous careers. I think, where am I? Sorry, I lost my place. So being a mentor for somebody, I think would be really cool. Building a long-term relationship with an employee who you can build on that relationship with for a long period of time would be pretty rewarding and beneficial for both people, the mentor and mentee. As for coaching, I think the biggest thing to remember is that a coaching is a coaching and not a discipline session. I think it's really easy, and I've been in this situation where you say things the wrong way or maybe approach them in a way to someone who's maybe sensitive or having a bad day, and they think that they're in trouble, or that you think they're doing a horrible job or whatever, however they interpret it. So there's a really fine line between coaching someone to do something differently or better and telling them that they're doing something wrong. Nobody likes to hear that they're doing something wrong. So that's probably a piece of advice that I would give just from my previous coaching experience. Page 224 says, in essence, people who have a positive coaching relationship with their supervisor feel more connected to their organization, so they are less likely to disengage from their workplace relationships. For Chapter 8, I chose differentiate between identity, image, and culture. Page 237 explains that an organization identity is a sense of self or how you internally feel about yourself or your organization. Culture is a collective identity of a group of people who share assumptions or meanings. And then image is how things are presented to external, like an outsider's perspective, I guess. So my identity is my introspective idea of who I am as a person. The way I view myself isn't necessarily the way you view me, or other people view me. My organizational culture is based on my company as a whole, but also my immediate department. We have acronyms and terms that we use that nobody else in our organization would understand in our tiny little department. And we make assumptions on what's going to happen next in a patient's care plan, or maybe what needs to be done without even talking to one another about it. It's just ingrained in us. So we kind of present ourselves to the outside world as, we want to put out this image of acceptance and preventive health care for all our patients. And my little tiny department maybe doesn't do as much with that part of my organization's culture. So it's kind of, in the long run, I guess we do, but big picture, not really. I thought it was pretty cool on page 247 how it breaks down the author's personal identities too. It shows people with different identities, how they mesh to work together for a common goal. So I thought I threw that in there. Next question I picked was the similarities between organizational identity and identification. I really struggled with the last two questions for chapter 8 for some reason, but I guess that's beyond here now. So organizational identity is something that can be identified by an organization, whereas identification is developed by the members of the organization. Identification is a sense of belongingness in a group, how the members intertwine and contribute to the group. So kind of how I was just talking about my department compared to my whole cultural company or organization. I couldn't find the term connective control in the chapter. The question says, discuss the role of connective control in a response. I searched that term. I reread chapters. I could not find that term. So what I did find was on page 241, it discusses concerted control, which is leadership's desire for control and predictability. Which can be achieved through power, technical control over the forms of communication, employee use, policy control, cultural control, like values, practices, and so on. And then I also found in the critical perspective on page 242, it discussed identity regulation, which is described as how managerial interests engage in conversations that shape how employees form their workplace identities. So those were the two things that kind of sounded like some sort of a control to me, but I couldn't find in particular anything that called out connective control, so apologize. For the case study questions, it says review each section of chapter 7 and 8 and identify at least one major section to help us better understand the case. Chapter 7, approaches to leadership section. Fiddler's contingency theory of leader effectiveness says that task-oriented leaders focus more on task and accomplishing organizational goals, whereas relationship-oriented leaders focus on creating positive interactions with followers and establishing positive relationships based on mutual trust, respect, and confidence. Donaldson was definitely a relationship-based leader who was lacking task structure. The text says that he can either alter his relationship behavior, which probably won't go over well with his company, or he can change the situation to match his leadership style better. I think the only way he could really do that would be not to seek out these eager new employees who really want to come up with these big new projects and plans if he's not willing to allow them to do that. He should probably pick people who are more willing to just come and do the job and go home. For the next section, followership, I think his name is Shalif. Shalif's style of fellowship describes 4 followers, which can kind of be related back to the case. It says, let's see here. Well, let me back up. There's a lot of employees in the case study that relate to the resource follower definition. They basically do the minimum to keep their job. They're not super invested. Kate reminds me of the individualist who challenges things and, wants to do the best and wants to do what's best for her. Donaldson wants people who are considered implementers, so those who will come in, do what they're supposed to do, and never challenge him. For the mentorship and coaching section, it sounds to me like a lot of people in this organization could benefit from some coaching, constructive criticism. Doesn't appear like anything like that is really allowed. Everything needs to stay even-keeled. Don't rock the boat, as the case study says. Page 224 said, researchers found that individuals with supervisors who utilized all 3 forms of coaching were motivated, satisfied, and productive. So I think that instituting some sort of coaching and the ability for people to be wrong and be open to criticism could really benefit that company. For chapter 8, identity and organization section, The case study shows some evidence of the risks of organizational identity discussed on page 237. It says internal perceptions strongly affect what problems are seen, what potential solutions are envisioned, and how the problems are ultimately addressed. So this company's identity is basically conditioning leaders to ignore the problems, like with the black hole and the lack of coaching and not allowing people to be critical of other people. So that's how they're basically running into the risks of that identity. The next section is identity and the organization member section. A critical perspective on page 242 explains how identity regulation is a form of control used to produce the employees that management wants. So management defines what they consider to be a good employee, how they should act, how they should relate to one another, and so on. We can really see this kind of behavior in the case study with the way Kate was treated when she tried to make a criticism or a suggestion in that meeting, as well as how the employees' projects were repeatedly forced into the black hole and never really brought back out. They're basically grooming their employees for how they want them to be with the way they're leading, I guess. For the diversity and organization section, the only thing I could really relate back to this case study was the work-life balance information on page 251. I guess that's one thing that Donaldson seems to have under wraps is he really allows his employees to have that work-life balance. They can come in late or leave early. No real obligations after work. Once they clock out, they're done for the day and they get to go home and they don't get to think about it because they don't really get to think at work either. That's all I got. I look forward to hearing what you all have to say. Have a good evening.